points of framing. Firstly, on the comparative. We think that the comparative that we have is what existed before the big conglomerate, meaning that we had many different little labels. So we had Sony as a different label, we had other labels as well. It means that firstly, they are more fitted to different genres, meaning that you can get more help, more promotion in this way, etc. Secondly, they are competing with each other, means that they need to be the best one, means that they need to promote new artists and innovative artists in order to actually be better than other companies. And thirdly, it also means that they can take risks because they need to have good investments, they have to have the most innovative artists. And so the way to break is to give voices to those innovation artists. Two main arguments in my speech. Firstly, why it harms the artists inside of the big conglomerates, and secondly, why it harms the creativity and diversity in music. So, first argument. As any monopoly, we think we have a monopoly over here as well, right? We think that those companies have a huge power over the music industry for three main different reasons. Firstly, we think that they have the ability to have a relationship with contracts all around the music industry, right? Meaning that they can get better deals, they can have much lower prices than the little artists, etc. Secondly, they have the power to create interest on songs, right? So they can promote them, and so more people will know about those songs. But thirdly, they have the ability to have unproportional bargaining power with platforms of music. So, for example, Spotify, YouTube, etc. We think on the comparative, this is a different situation. On the comparative, we think everyone has to compete differently, right? So it means that if contracts want to lower prices because of competition, they need to actually have to bargain with them, etc., and to be the best one. And we think that the different labels have an equal power to create buzz. Why do we think that it extremely harms the artists? So we think that today artists know that in order to produce songs, they have to be in a contract with the big companies, as I explained before. What does this mean? Firstly, it means that you have to agree to their own conditions. It looks like they have rights over the production of your songs, and they have the right to use the songs however they want. Secondly, they have to agree to working certain long hours and to produce a certain amount of songs, otherwise they cannot continue. Thirdly, many of the time it means that they also have to stick with one genre, because this genre is what is fitting for the company, even if they want to expand their wings and go to other genres, etc. What does this mean? It looks like we get cases like Taylor Swift and Sony, right? Of artists that want to break free but cannot do that because of rights, etc. We get cases like Kesha that actively stopped making music because of her contracts with those companies. Why is this bad? Firstly, just on terms of creativity, we think that when you have a label that limits the amount of songs that you can produce because people from up there says to you, no, we don't want to take risks, just do whatever you know how to do, it means that we get less creative songs. But secondly, on terms of burnout, when you are seen as a tool to ROI, when you have no bargaining power in front of your company, you are burned out, you cannot bargain, etc. And this is bad. But thirdly, just principally, we force people enter contracts that they are not necessarily wanting to enter, and we think that this in order to work in their own profession, and we think principally this is wrong to force people into those contracts. On the comparative, firstly, there is a competition on you. It means that you have many labels that you can give that you can try and enter to. It means that you get better conditions, you get more rights, less chance that your song will not belong to you, when you can say, okay, I take the preferable conditions on other labels. But secondly, you can move more freely between different labels. It means that it gives you bargaining power on things like creative freedom, and also it gives you the exit right from bad contracts. But thirdly, because they are smaller, it means that there also is just better personal relationship and better mentorship, because the person that is managing that label most likely knows the different artists. They have mentors inside of it that are specific to the genre, meaning that they can give you more support, and meaning that they also know you, meaning that you have more ability to firstly feel accepted as an artist, but secondly to just be able to influence them much more. So we think your conditions are just better. Before I continue, let's take opening.
Why would they do this? Why would they limit your creative freedom so much if you are the artist and you are the creative genius in this
What
company?
breaks the deadlock is that firstly, they have power, secondly, you don't have power if you are able to produce a certain amount of money from each song, and people have a bias to what sells and know what think they know what sells. We think this happens here. Why it harms the creativity and diversity inside of music. So firstly, we need to understand why are those companies not good. Firstly, they are very old, right? We talk about old directors, or if not old, at least very privileged, very white. People that control those companies have no real connection to what speaks to the younger audience and what is important to the younger audience. Secondly, we think that they are slow, right? They are slow in responding because they already have a huge amount of contacts, because they know the field, the people are on the roots less. What does this mean? Firstly, and this also answers the POI, actively harming competition. Even if there is other artists that is new, that is cool, that is succeeds, but that is not wanting to enter those companies, the big conglomerates, they will actively limit their platform, actively try and bargain in order for them not to have as many abilities to produce music, or as many abilities to compete with their own artists by giving them unfair advantage to their own artists. We think this harms creativity. But secondly, in terms of diversity, they simply do not understand. They don't understand what is cool, and we talk, this is this house regrets motion, right? So it is also retrospective. So they don't understand hip hop as much, or to like new bands as much, and they don't understand why more diverse artists should get the platform. We talk about firstly international artists that are also cool, hype, etc., and need to get this platform, that can share new opinions and can have us change our biases towards certain parts of society. We think that because those companies and record labels are old, do not understand, don't have the incentive to change and to hear the voices of the crowd, they don't need to change, and so we don't get those artists. We call it propose.
Thank you very much for that speech. We'll now welcome up the op leaders, bringing the case to op bench. Here.
By the way, I do know your YouTube channel. I asked PM in a point, why would they do this? They answer me, they can do this. This is a missed burden. They prove they have the ability to do this, but don't prove why they have an incentive to limit creative freedom of artists. Zero mechanisms here, maybe it is DPM, but I doubt it because it's impossible to prove. So firstly, why they don't have an incentive to actually limit the creative freedom of artists? Firstly, they will cause huge backlash to them, because artists also have a platform, they also have fans, but generally all artists can group around this artist and sympathize with them and say, you shouldn't limit artists' creative freedom and all of these things. But secondly, they know they shouldn't do this because it's not in their interest, because artists are the creative geniuses, they are the engine of these companies. So why would they make a stupid decision to limit the people who make the money? No, they should let them spread their wings and create music, because their music, their creative process has brought them money to tour. It is completely ludicrous for me to believe. But thirdly, they know economically this also hurts, because each artist has its core audience. So why would they risk losing this core audience, losing a constant source of revenue for reasons unknown by opening up? So this proves they don't have incentive, these production companies don't have incentive to actually do this. But secondly, why they don't also have a leverage to control you as much? Firstly, notice they are still not monopolies on our side of the house. We have 3 examples in the info slide, meaning that you can still choose from these 3 companies what you will actually alter. But secondly, oftentimes when they scam you and they give you bad contracts like Taylor Swift, it is not because it's a monopoly, it's because you are young, you are naive, you don't know better, you don't have a lawyer, you don't have people who can actually show you what's wrong and what's right. They can scam you with bad contracts because you just want the money instantly, not necessarily think about long-term consequences. That is how usually these artists are scammed, not because they have monopolies, no link there. But thirdly, even if they shoot themselves in the leg, they say on the comparative you have record labels for specific genres. This means that even if you are a specific genre, you also have a monopoly only for that record label. They don't know what they're talking about. moving on to the first argument. Why? When you have bigger production companies, you have more capacity to invest into more niche markets and more specific music. Notice, firstly, investing in this type of music, niche markets, and all of these things is incredibly risky because it's niche, because it's small, because not many people buy this music, not many people go to concerts and all of these things. This means, that, especially when you already have huge fixed costs of marketing, production, hiring musicians, studio time, and all of these things, this means that on their side of the house, if you are a small production companies, it is not enough for you to invest into this because the return is not enough, right? But secondly, you just have an opportunity cost. Why should I invest into this niche market, which the return, I may even lose money. Why would I do this if I can just invest into something that will probably bring me more money, something that is way more mainstream? How does this change on our side of the house? Firstly, our production companies are much more diversified. This means that even if they fail in a certain, let's say, specific genre, they have other genres they can fall back to, which is a constant stream of revenue. Secondly, they're just bigger and have more money, meaning that even if they fail, they have a bigger cushion. Even if they lose money in this specific album or in this specific genre, it doesn't really matter because they still have other money, other reserves to fall out on. Thirdly, they just have more expertise, meaning they are more confident that they are able to make this album into a good one regarding production, regarding mixing, and all of these things. But moreover here, you have incentives on both sides of the house to do this. The difference is you have only ability on our side of the house. Why? Firstly, on both sides of the house, production companies want to go into untapped markets because they can be the first one there, they can invest more into this music, they can, make a name for themselves into this specific genre. But secondly, every risk is an opportunity, for something to become much more popular. So they have a risk going there, but this album can become really popular, it can sell really well, maybe a new artist can be the next, I don't know what artist, Taylor Swift or Lana Del Rey, I prefer much Lana Del Rey. So you have a risk on both sides of the house, so meaning that on our side of the house, it's much easier for you to offset this risk because of the inherency of these companies. What does this lead to? Three impacts. Firstly, it helps artists that are dire or in need of help. Not starving, but just don't have enough money. But secondly, you bring music to people. They have now more diversified music. They can listen to something they align with more, not just mainstream music and a lot of these things. But thirdly, you are more likely to bring music from certain groups. And they say hip hop and all of these things. These guys are all, they don't understand. Bullshit point, honestly. But the thing is, on our side of the house, you are more likely to bring hip hop into the mainstream, such as in the 90s, because it is a risky music. It is not something that is well known. It is something different. But on our side of the house, you are able to offset this music and actually bring this music to the mainstream, which is a good thing. And you need these production companies because I think everybody, or they already proved, you need studio time, you need someone to mix this, you need advice, you need production, you need huge marketing. This is why it is hugely expensive. Closing, you like? Opening.
If you're a production company specialized in metal music, you don't need to take so many risks in order to produce your niche music, but you do take because you want to compete with other labels in the same area.
Not necessarily. You don't necessarily always take risks, especially if you can just invest into something more, more secure. Maybe sometimes, maybe you invest in one band, but on our side of the house, I think the competitive is much bigger. I think we proved it. Have to engage. Second argument, when you have bigger companies, you're likely to get better deals from streaming platforms. Firstly, notice, currently streaming is the most dominant source of, consummation of music because it is so accessible and because it is cheaper. You just buy one subscription and all of these things. Why is this problematic? It's because the problem is you artists don't receive enough royalties. They receive only 5% of the money from streaming and all of these things. Why? Because generally these streaming platforms also just operate on a subscription. You don't buy a CD, you just pay $10 and get infinite music and all of these things, meaning there is less money for each and stuff like this. And this is problematic. So on their side of the house, on their side of the house, it is likely that these streaming platforms, which are the most dominant, have huge leverage over these even in smaller production companies. Why? Because if these production companies are not on these platforms, no one will listen to their music. People just don't buy CDs anymore. People stream, people go a lot in these things. Meaning it is impossible, meaning they have a huge leverage over them. They can give them lesser deals, less royalties, and a lot of these things. On our side of this house, this changes for a couple of reasons. Firstly, when you're one of these universal, let's say, or whatever the name of the production companies, your music is literally 40% of the market. If they don't have it, they have huge leverage over you. But secondly, we solve the collective action problem because it's easier for these three companies to communicate with each other and actually, how do you say, make better deals. But finally, even these production companies can make their own platforms, such as Jay-Z did and a lot of these things. On our side of the house, meaning that the main source of income for a lot of these artists is streaming. That is how people buy music. On our side of the house, the royalties are much bigger, from 5% to 20%, and that is a huge difference for every person in the music industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that speech. The Deputy Prime Minister up now, Communication of the Government. Here.
Okay. Are you ready? Great. I'm going to begin my speech in 3, 2, 1, and I'm going to first of all talk to you about the artist, and then I'm going to talk to you about the type of music which is created and streamed. Before that, note that opening opposition never actually responded to our analysis on the power of these corporations. That is to say that they oftentimes have power over the other elements of the music industry. They have power over the producers, and they have power over the people we need to film the clips and the such, and they look at them in exclusivity contracts and stuff like that. They have power over the radios. They have power over the playing licenses. So this means that oftentimes they can manipulate the charts in their favor and stuff like that. They have power over the creation of tours, which is oftentimes the most important thing for artists because they make the most money out of tours because that's what people that buy the merch and the tickets and stuff like that, right? So it's considered within the room, especially when they talk about economics of scale, that they have huge power over the market and they have huge power over people doing that. Now, let's just specifically talk to you about why this is bad in the general case. First of all, about the artists themselves. Note, I think that artists are the most important population within the context of the sound. Why is this true? First of all, artists are literally just the most impacted people, right? For them, music is their life, for them, music is their everything, right? They live, they literally make money by that, they feel it every day, stuff like that. This is their soul, this is their craft. Note that other individuals here have access to many different types of entertainment and hedonism, right? They can watch TV, they can eat food, I don't know, I don't care, they have a lot of different areas to get narratives and stuff like that. Second of all, artists are also the most vulnerable, right? They oftentimes don't have money, right? They need that literally in order to live. For them, it's make or break, it's literally the entire livelihood, and oftentimes they literally just fucking need that money because they're very poor. Note, this way also implicitly it says that the most important artists are the smallest and weakest artists. That is to say, the ones who oftentimes out of label companies, starting their journey, stuff like that, I think that they're more numerous, more important, more vulnerable, and in the general case, the most important. Let's now talk to you about these artists. Note, the main line, first of all, about the artists outside of the streaming companies, which are again the majority, because the record labels take inherently the minority of artists, because like they only have the minority of the market. Like many independent artists are working outside, doing Spotify, stuff like that. What is important here to note? First of all, note, the main case of opening opposition here is the streaming case, right? That streaming markets are like, that the streaming companies are so dominant. 3 responses here. Number 1, this is a retroactive motion. This house regrets. Streaming companies are new. The consolidation has happened since the 70s and the 80s. Literally just a minority of the time under the motion. Second of all, note, I think that these streaming companies oftentimes have a strong interest to create these, the record labels oftentimes have an interest to create this streaming monopoly and ensure that it works in their favor. That is to say, they oftentimes want to work with streaming companies in order to ensure that they're the dominant powers in the market so that they get the most favorable deals with them. That is to say, they create exclusivity contracts with these streaming companies, make the streaming companies the most dominant and stuff like that, because they want the streaming companies to like them, to give them good contracts, while as the rest of the market gets fucked because they don't have the same contracts. Lastly, note, I think that record label unions were a thing even before the consolidation happened, right? If there is a streaming monopoly that is fucking over all of these small record labels, they can still unite, they can still move into a competing monopoly and stuff like that. The important part is that you can create a streaming monopoly competition against for the small record labels to move to when all of the market is consolidated and the big record labels work with these streaming companies oftentimes. Why is this important? We claim to. These record labels cause an active enshittification of the market for small artists outside of them, and oftentimes, can I stop my speech? Because
Yeah.
okay, so 3 of them.
Okay.
3 of them on my clock. 3, 2, 1. These record labels oftentimes cause an active enshittification of the market using their power against small artists outside of the record labels. How does that look? Number one, they oftentimes abuse their conditions and exclusive status in order to create contacts that lock other artists out of the market. They create unique contacts to get a lot of, so that their artists get a lot of revenue from the streaming companies, but the rest of the artists don't get that because they don't have the capacity in order to have the same contacts. They lock out producers and many elements of the music industry using exclusivity contracts or forcing other individuals to engage in higher prices on them. Second of all, they oftentimes abuse the large copyright library that they have in order to fuck over other artists. How does that look like? Note, copyright issues in music are very subjective, right? If you've ever seen the controversies of like a song that sounds similar to another song, this is because like a lot of different tunes and basses are very similar to one another. Judges don't understand what is similar and what is not, and stuff like that. Note, big streaming labels have a lot more money than the smaller streaming labels, have a lot more access to copyrighted material in order to fuck over smaller artists, so they sue them better, threaten them with lawsuits better, and block them out better. This is literally just happening throughout the entirety of the streaming services. Second of all, note, they simply just so note that for the comparative there, with smaller streaming labels, they have less ability to lock out this exclusivity contract, so there's a lot more competition within the market that smaller artists can also access. They can also access different and smaller streaming labels on the first level, and second of all, they obviously have a far smaller label market and stuff like that. Importantly note, also that these big labels don't allow a lot of small labels in, right? I think that the opening government analysis here is that simply that you can't the analysis that you can't is that you can't limit them in a lot of different cases. But note here, importantly, the auteur in these places is not the artist. The artist oftentimes is not the person that they trust with the creative freedom. They have the majority of the data. They're the ones who are recognized. When artists come into these streaming labels, they're oftentimes small, they oftentimes don't have a huge audience, and they oftentimes don't know what they want. Oftentimes, the streaming labels are the ones that have the most data, and they're the ones that trust themselves the most and are not willing to take the risk. This is an analysis that comes from Yael. Opening opposition never fucking bothered to respond to them. This means that oftentimes they're not going to escape for new artists, they're not going to let new artists in, and when they let them, they oftentimes engineer their music, engineer their audience, and force them to do certain types of music. You know, this happened with Taylor Swift, started as a country singer, was literally forced to become a pop star and stuff like that. This means that both a lot of small artists can enter these record labels because they have no interest in their own music and creative expression, but also that all of the analysis, both on them being fucked creatively, but also note them being fucked financially and being fucked in a stronger extent, doesn't stand. Opening opposition says, oh, but you have all of this leverage because there's competition in the market and stuff like that. But note that when you only have 3 record labels, they can cartelize. If you leave one record label, you get blacklisted because no other record label has an interest in order to do that. Small record labels are more numerous, so you can cartelize them far harder, and they're far more backwards in the market, so it's a lot harder to create this cartel and fuck them over. Closing opposition. No? Opening? Cool. Okay. Importantly here for that. So this basically means that small artists outside get fucked, big artists in get fucked. Lastly, quickly, on the question of music and new genres and stuff like that, they claim to they have more capacity. I don't think that they're that strong on the incentive. Notice first of all, there is an asymmetry between risk and reward when you're talking about big label companies. If you just continue course, you're making money because you're a monopoly and are the strongest artist in the market. But if you are losing money or taking a risk, the CEO gets critiqued by the board of directors, right? They get a lot more critique internally when they're fucked over, whereas if they stay, they still make a lot of profit, so there's an asymmetry between this and that. Second of all, they have no expertise in smaller markets, and they're oftentimes less lucrative. They don't know which market is small and which market is not, and stuff like that. Third of all, they oftentimes lack the audience, third of all, they oftentimes lack the ability to push to a smaller audience and stuff like that. Note here, smaller record companies have far more incentive because they're far more competitive, far more expertise because they're usually for a single market, and in terms of capacity and money, because they do less markets and they're more niche, they don't need as much money in order to stay within that market. The incentive doesn't exist for smaller markets and like more minority artists within there. The incentive exists on us, and because they're smaller, they also have the capacity. Very powerful.
Thank you very much for that speech. Now, Deputy Opposition Leader up to the top half. Here.
OG wants to convince you that there is no competition, that there is basically two companies that do whatever they want. Notice that there are multiple companies that does it. Three are in the info slide. There are also multiple ones who are a little bit smaller. But notice that I also want to tell you that when you have smaller number of big companies, the competition is actually bigger. On their side of the house, you have smaller companies who are not looking to make big profits because they are aware that they cannot do it. Because you can never be, when you're small, it is unlikely that you're going to be so big, and it is unlikely that the others are going to be so big and eat you up. Meaning that it's enough for you to actually just, be to some level just staying in the business. On our side of the house, you have big investors who want to make big money, but you also have far bigger fear that the other big company is going to, consolidate more, that is going to take over the market because they have bigger ability to do so. Meaning that on our side of the house, you have much more actual competition. This means that on our side of the house, all of these maybe 5 or 6 companies are, competing for better artists to giving them, better rights. That's why in Microsoft you have better working conditions than in small, computer office, because Microsoft wants to do all of these things. But let's also notice that they don't say, oh, it's far more worse for, these artists' rights and because there is a small competition. Notice that first, because these companies compete more, they're more likely to give better rights. Second of all, bigger companies are much more in the public eye. When Sony or a big company screws up the artist, it is much harder for them than when some small company who know what's know about does it. Bigger artists are also more likely to come out to the public and say, look what they did to me. That doesn't happen on their side of the house because nobody knows who these companies are. It is much harder to regulate them. But notice also, because they're smaller, they're more likely to be in a need and incentive to actually, make artists overwork more hours. It is much more likely that in a small store, owner will ask you to do more hours because they're much more in a need. They need to make the ends. On our side of the house, the companies doesn't have that much incentive to push artists to the limits because they know they can actually, make money anyway. Meaning that on their side of the house, you have much more incentive to actually screw over the artists. And then we come to the creativity part. They want to convince you that smaller companies are likely to take risks, to go into niche markets, and then our big is just gonna say and do the same. Look at the analysis that they give you. The analysis is virtually this. There are small companies who are in some specific genres. First of all, there are not that many, and second of all, on our side of the house, you have parts of the big companies that do that. This is not the analysis for that. The analysis for that is simply what Đorđe tells you is that when you have bigger companies, they're much more likely to take risks and actually go into those kind of things. Just think about it. Is it more likely that the big pharmaceutical company is gonna look out for a rare drug, or a small company who needs to make the ends meet? It is much more likely that the big ones are gonna go into those markets and actually do that kind of things. And second of all, they are portraying this in a regress motion like we don't have any ability to choose. Just think about it. This is the time we have so much diversity into music. You have pop, trap, everything is now available. I don't know what they're talking about. It's exactly when there were small companies that they actually were able to do it. No, it's 5 something. Okay, please. Okay, let's move on to what they say is a problem, that these companies are able to negotiate better deals and therefore screw over others. First of all, notice that there is, what Đorđe telling, huge impacts of getting better deals. This means that all of these streaming and other companies are less able to exploit artists because they have, these label companies as virtually agents and managers to actually, negotiate in their part. This means that a lot more money is given to the artists. And they want to say, oh, but this screws, smaller artists. Notice that first of all, these are completely different markets. And smaller artists, are coming into the industry. They are looking for completely different markets, within which the big companies do not compete. But also the niche artists are also in a different market, meaning they are unlikely to compete with each other. Okay, so Yeah.
OO wants to have their cake can eat it too. If those companies are a monopoly and don't need to compete, their impacts are about the taking risks exist. If there is a competition, they have to accept there is also less niches and all of those impacts.
No, why competition means less niches? Because, you know, okay, there is a big competition in a way that you want to compete, but you have the money on the side that you also can use to do it. The competition means you're less likely to don't care about what the others do and you're less likely to let the others do whatever they want, but you still have the money to invest in other things. And the final thing is they say, oh, big companies do not have the expertise, they do not know what, you know, they're old people don't want young people want. First of all, come on, like reality. We have never, you know, today parents don't have fucking idea what their children are listening to. They're just big companies who have expertise, who can fund consultants, who can fund people who are in the industry, who can tell them what to do. On their side of the house, you have some people who have presumably much less experience, much less likely to actually have these kind of things. On our side of the house, what you get is simple. What you get, one, is more niche things, more artists. This means that you, first of all, allow for these artists to actually be accepted into the industry. Allow this franchise group to actually be able to, you know, to do all of these things. Even for some, you know, even not so making money songs to be there. But second of all, you get better deals for the artists. We believe that these things are much more important than actually trying to okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for that speech. We'll now welcome the government member to begin the closing half of today's debate. Here.
Government have an issue in this debate because they like to assert that there are lots of smaller companies that are going to take, like, that care lots about small genres, and that these smaller companies are able to diversify and are able to push these genres to the limit. But I just think that in reality they don't actually respond to the analysis that opening opposition gives as to the reasons why there often isn't incentive to want to push this forward. So what we're going to do is fill in two gaps in opening government. First of all, we're going to explain why it's the case that there are lots of indie smaller companies that are likely to focus on specific genres and are set up in a manner which focuses on these specific genres. And secondly, we're going to explain why they have the capacity to further those genres, to continue to push their artists to ensure that there is a diversity of genres, which takes opening opposition at their best in dealing with their claim on diversity. Okay then, why is it the case that there are likely to be lots of small companies that focus on various different types of genres? The first thing here is just because this is the way that these companies tend to be set up. So usually, the reason that like Sony and Universal and Warner have have production companies is because they are just media conglomerates in general. They produce films, they produce music, they do all sorts of types of media, film included, the TV included in that. The difference is that indie companies tend to specifically be set up to exclusively focus on music, to not be worried about any other form of media. So what that means is that people that often set up these companies have a specific interest in a specific type of music and therefore set up that specific label in order to be able to promote that music, because they see that there's a niche in the market, because they feel as if a type of music that they're passionate about isn't being produced enough, and therefore they set up that market. Comparatively, companies that are run by other big conglomerates that have lots of fingers and lots of different pies don't necessarily care about the type of music they're producing, but rather just want to make a type of music that's going to make them lots of money. So they inherently don't necessarily care about the music that they are producing. Secondly though, I think the connections that smaller like studios have are much smaller, right? So they rely much more on word of mouth in order to be able to find new artists and attract them to their studio. What that means is they go and scout at local venues where buskers are playing, or people are playing with like their high school bands. It also means that they're more likely to be located in specific areas and look out for up and coming artists and talent within that area where there might be a trend in a specific genre. All of this means that they tend to focus on smaller artists that are more likely to be doing something that's different, that's original, and they're more able to find those specific people because they are located not in Hollywood, but rather actually in the neighbourhood that you live in. Because they care, because they're more likely to actually have heard of you because they already have people employed that are playing the same gigs as you, or whatever that means. What that means is they're likely to further and be able to actually find the artists that are specific to these specific genres, comparative to Sony, which doesn't care, no thank you, about some random reggae artist, but would rather find the next Taylor Swift. Why are they able then to push diversity? Because if we show that they're able to be set up to produce these specific genres, we then need to show that they're able to push that diversity further. The first thing here is I just think they have a lot more expertise than these bigger conglomerations do when it comes to making this music. That's to say, when they're set up by people that have specifically been focused on that type of music to begin with, they understand how to produce that type of music, they understand how to mix that type of music, the type of production or the type of marketing that needs to go into that. I would note that the reason that conglomerates don't want to have to make a pivot to other types of music is because they don't understand how to make that type of music. It requires having to hire other people or whatever it might be. That can be a problem for them. I think comparatively, no thank you, it's much easier for smaller companies to be able to focus their resources and energy on it, and because they actually know more about it. And I also just think that means that the end product of the music they make tends to be better, insofar as because they are more highly specialised in making that music, and because they understand it more, the music they make is better. Secondly then, I think it's just because they are able, they care about it to begin with. So what I would say this means is that they are more likely to want to ensure that the music genre that they particularly care about is being pushed to its limits, that the creativity of that music is continuing to expand, that they are trying to bring in new elements of sound, or trying to make that music more creative, more interesting to listen to. I would note that even if it's the case that conglomerates do decide to take on a random hip-hop artist, the extent to which they want to further that genre or care about that genre relative to every other genre out there in music is really, really small. So I don't think that they care about pushing hip hop, because ultimately they just want to make money. And if there's more money to be made and pushing some other Sabrina Carpenter, Taylor Swift-esque pop music, then that's what they're going to that's where they're going to focus their attention. What this means is they don't care about ensuring that you are bringing in new creative ideas. I think that these smaller companies are far more likely to be willing and want to take the risks, and also have the ability to take these risks. Because when you're relying on fewer artists, you want to ensure that their creativity, that the creativity they have is maximised. So you're more likely then to push them to their creative limits, let them take the risks that they want to take, and ensure that what they have is really good. The end result of this is I just think that these groups are able to push the diversity of these genres. I want to explain the impacts of this then, because I think to the extent that open government are talk about diversity, they don't explain why that's actually useful to people, particularly listeners. So one, I think this is just something that's really, really interesting and different people to hear. Notice that we have a complete oversaturation in the world of content, media, music, whatever it might be, and therefore the more you're able to find unique styles, unique angles, the more interesting it is to be able to listen to. The more you're able to advance the way people think about music, the way that they're able to express their emotions, these types of things. Secondly though, I think it's able to challenge mainstream music. So when you have smaller indie labels that focus on this music, you're then able to challenge them because there's these new trends coming. And lastly, I think there's subcultures that form around them. So I think the biggest impact here is actually on listeners, insofar as they're now able to develop subcultures surrounding this indie music or this new type of music that's developing. That's when people are able to get the most out of the musical experience, when they're able to when they're able to engage with it most. Sure.
Yeah, consolidation literally means big companies buying smaller ones. If without consolidation, they are niche companies, they're just going to be bought by the big ones and continue doing the same thing. They don't need to shift anything.
So I don't necessarily think it is the case that they're going to be bought up by these companies, but I also think that it's useful to have these companies acting as independent bodies in the first instance, because it means that they are able to focus on these genres as opposed to being bought up and then having to just conform to whatever Sony wants you to conform to, having to worry about the bottom line that some CEO that's never met you tells you to dictate to. I think comparatively, you have your own autonomy, you're far better to make the creative decisions, to be able to push artists. You're not relying on your job being beholden to someone else in the first instance. So I think this just means that people have greater agency to be able to do the things that they want to do under our side of the house. Lastly, on Wayne then, why do we care more about the people that listen to this music in the first instance? One, I think it's just the case that there are more people that are affected by this. So purely on scale, the number of people that listen to music comparative to the number of artists is just much, much greater, right? And therefore we probably care about the diversity of music to a far greater extent. But secondly, on exclusivity. It's just the case that the artists are able to probably create their own songs. It's the case that they want to be able to do that. But uniquely, the only avenue in which viewers are able, or listeners are able to hear new types of music is through this type of music being made in the first instance, and therefore it's imperative that it's made by smaller companies. For these reasons, we're proud to propose.
Thank you very much for that speech. We now have the opposition member up in the case of CEO. Here.
Okay, I'm going to take us back a few steps and talk about why larger record labels are uniquely able to better discover artists and at the earliest stages and better discover artists with the ability to go all the way, and they have then the through having the most resources, most funding, the most risk forward characteristics, which I think is in clash with OG's risk averse point. They have the ability to create the cultural contagion that the most successful artists have, that uniquely comes out of larger music labels. So first of all, on this clash with OG and independent labels and what they look like, right? We think that this is probably going to take out why their characterization probably just isn't true. We think that independent labels always just have less funding, less resources, and are going to be risk averse. This is for a couple of reasons. We think that they probably just have less investors and backing than bigger labels. We think that therefore they have less monetary opportunity for getting and just getting the most modern gear, modern equipment into their recording studios. In that independent labels probably have one single recording studio with gear from 5-10 years ago, which in the recording and music industry is probably incredibly outdated. Which also clashes with the CG's point on the end product of music is better of independent labels, which it probably just isn't because of this point, right? We think you need massive investment costs and massive the ability of having these large margins and large economies of scale. No, to be able to invest in the best equipment for your musicians and for the people who are under your label. On resources end, we think that record labels are always going to have more people employed under them to put the time into making music and their artists creating things, right? We think that this looks the recording capabilities that I talked about, and also therefore the one-to-one mentorship that OG tell you that you uniquely get on their side, which I also think isn't probably true because of the fact that the recording labels, the bigger ones, have so many different teams and so many different if you subsidiary companies that they can probably allocate the one-to-one mentors that you get from independent labels probably to the same extent because they just employ more people, and we think that you probably you're able to get the same level of mentorship because of the more people they employ, right? We think that bigger labels also have greater R&D budgets, which probably just pushes the industry forward and therefore creates better music for everyone, in that it is the biggest labels that discover new techniques to record songs or do different things, or just create better recording equipment and able to push this music out into the world. We think that also just by size of companies and quick economy push or quick business push, that smaller companies are always going to be less risk averse than large companies because they have finer margins for profit, and in the fact that if a small independent company tries to tell their one successful independent artist oh, you should take we should take this risk, we should move into this other genre, we should do this new thing and create this, try to move into this fan base. If that fails, the company literally goes bankrupt, right? Because of these finer margins. So therefore we think that independent labels probably just don't function the way Gov are telling you they do. So then onto why bigger labels are uniquely able to discover artists. A characterization of how artists get discovered by these big labels. We think that they probably just have hundreds of interns interns and like agents and like people whose like whole job it is to like go out in the world and discover artists or like troll through like different like YouTube, etc. Like we think that like it looks like people like Simon Cowell like literally like holding events to like discover artists where like thousands of people line up around the block. We think that like smaller companies just never have the ability to do this because they never have the money or the advertising budget to like get these things out into the world to the same extent. Therefore, the risk of artists never getting discovered is therefore greater on government, where one aspiring artists just crowd each other out. This looks like the risk of like never getting discovered when like 50 like smaller companies necessarily leads like the like flooding of artists into the market who are all like operating by themselves and like I wrote a song, please take it. No, I wrote a song, please take it, right? And then secondly, how like independent labels again necessarily lack the resources that bigger labels do. It is incredibly resource heavy to discover new artists and like put the early time into the like making their careers successful, right? Bigger companies have the ability to do this because they have the like economies of scale and like the just like the money and the profits to like put money into people and take more risks inherently. Therefore, the impact of this, is twofold. Therefore, why on government you get less net artist discovery and why this is bad for the music industry and for the artists themselves and for the record labels. We think that like one, this harms the smallest artists the most that they claim to protect. We think that like you get like also like less diversity and like less artists and like moving into different niches and different genres because of the fact that like by their characterization, these independent CG's characterization, these independent labels necessarily have to stick to one niche. Therefore, you can never take the risks that OG tells you that they're going to take, right? We think that like Universal probably has like offices all around the world and like different like sub offices and sub teams, etc. That's going to cover like country and pop and whatever, right? And therefore, second impact, you get like less good and like actually talented artists who can like go all the way. Okay, OG.
Cartelization ensures self-profit. Competition in new markets create risk and fiduciary critiques on CEOs. Only many small companies force competition, prevent market enshittification, and help all artists, even those not under record labels.
Okay, look, I just think that like competition like exists on like both sides. I think that like where the music industry is always going to be a profitable industry to like get into for like anyone, competition is always going to exist. You can't the competition is symmetric, right? We think that like also on like prices and like competition and what Top Hat talked about, we think that like music labels like when they're bigger always have an incentive to keep prices low, in that like they're aware that like if people aren't willing to pay like €50 for a streaming service, they're just going to pirate music because that's so easy to do with the internet nowadays, right? And also on like why the bigger labels being able to like discover artists ways over our opening, in that like it's prior to any of OO's point on like musicians getting contract functioning, where like musicians have to be discovered before they get contracts by these labels, right? Then on like why the larger labels are uniquely able to like create the most successful and like the cultural contagion artists and like Swiftie mania and things that we get, right? We think that like they are uniquely able to like create a brand, in that like they can like they push incredible amounts of money into like meetups and signings and like concert tours and like all of these things that like independent labels are like literally not able to afford for their artists. Therefore, like you get artists that like are more successful quicker, and you get like the like subcultures that CG say that you get, they never happen to the same extent, and therefore artists never become as successful as they do on our side. Very proud to oppose.
Thank you very much for that speech. We'll now have the government whip up to include the government bench. Here.
Don't feel why.
How about
We have a bet. No, we have a bet over what is the average age in this room, so you can also think so much. They have to do it. No.
Is this an old room, is it?
We all need to.
Actually, well, aside from that.
Right, this was a number of age.
Like that pricks everything.
Sorry, I have many sheets. Is there any chance we could like move these back?
Just tell me how much.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Woo, God.
first response to our extension that I want to deal with, it comes from closing opposition, and it's that, well, if they're sticking to one niche, these indie labels, then they're not going to be branching out. A couple of things to say about this. The first is that I think when you, as a label, have made your made your name off of promoting a particular kind of music, then I think you're just that wasn't popular before. Then you're more willing to do this again, insofar as the ones that survive are the ones who are successful at it, and therefore you have a history of doing this successfully, and therefore want to do it. But secondly, I think that it misses like the specific thing that Zainab made, which was that these labels grew up out of the genre itself. So, for example, like the two-tone record label, like in the 70s in England, grew up out of like the scam movement that was happening in clubs around that place, and then that's how it promoted itself. Now, we think the reason why this is less likely to happen where you have more conglomeration is because presumably people are only willing to like spend so much money on music, to spend so much of their lives listening to music. So to the extent that when the major labels are discovering new artists, they're going to be then that's going to like crowd out the artists that you could have sold if you had been an indie label that was starting up, and therefore I think you get less of that on our side. Now I want to deal with the response, which I guess comes from opening opposition, which is that given that these are being absorbed by the bigger companies, then you're still going to get all of our benefits, it's just that they'll be part of bigger companies. There are a number of reasons why this doesn't work. The first thing I would say is that this might well respond to the opening government version of the claim, but it doesn't respond to ours because the unique context which we provide is that these people aren't as interested in money as are the major labels, because they're not like big. Because often they're people who just love music. So, for example, the Rough Trade label, which was the one which made the Smiths famous and that kind of thing, just was started by a guy who was selling records on the street before, and then he really cared about music and saw an opportunity to take it. These are people who are more likely to be willing to sacrifice more for this. But I think the second thing is that the info slide literally tells us that there is a difference between the kinds of music which these which the major labels are willing to promote, in that they're less willing to promote groups. And obviously there are other reasons why they would do this anyway, which is that like it means that you have to pay fewer people, and it means that you lose the risk of a band breaking up, and therefore like your profit going away if you have a group. But I think to the so therefore we basically also get the difference. That is that when they're part of this conglomerate, they're just less likely to take these risks or to take risks on groups, precisely because they need to report to people who want money in a way that you don't need to do when you're independent. But the last thing I would say is that the indie artists themselves don't want to sign up to this label if it's part of a conglomerate, because then you're far more likely to feel like they're selling out to other people on the scene at their home. They're going to fear the risk of being dictated what to do, and then they're going to look like they're not as credible anymore. And I would point out that most people who who care a lot about music don't actually think they're going to make it, right? Because the vast majority of people think that are correct in thinking that most people who want to make career music aren't going to do it. Therefore, it's not like people are. Therefore, it's people don't think they're going to make it, and therefore probably just care about being able to do what they want. Yes.
They're definitely interested in money, because without money the label will shut down. This means that every album counts. On their side of the house, every album has to be mainstream mass appeal in order to make enough money to make ends meet. On our side of the house, we have more caution, more time to experiment, and make better music.
Yeah, right, so obviously you need to wash your face, but you don't need to make profits in the same way that you do. Especially because when you are part of, as Zainab explains, a company which is selling other types of media as well, you need to make sure that money is directed towards your particular branch of the company rather than being directed towards like the film division or whatever, because that's where the profits are. Therefore, you're in active competition with other ways that the big bosses could choose to spend the money, and therefore you are much more likely to care about profit over allies in a way that you're not in a way that you're not going to do. I want to deal with closing opposition. With closing opposition now. Okay. I think firstly, in terms of the greater capability which the major labels have in terms of their equipment and so on, opening probably said this as well. I just think this probably isn't as important to indie artists because, like, one, I think lots of equipment is just like extremely cheap now. Like you can get GarageBand on your phone while you're mixing. That and advances in technology mean this isn't the case. But also I think people are generally more interested in being able to if they're going to listen to niche music, then they're listening to it because of the creativity which you see behind that rather than the production quality. In terms of the idea that it's the bigger companies are more able to reach like more artists. We would say that even if it is true that they are able to reach more artists, the difference is that they're reaching artists which are more similar to each other than we're different. And the problem here then is not for the artists themselves, it's to the listeners, right? Because presumably we don't really think that an artist who's making creative music has or like an artist who's making similar music to everyone else, that makes much of a difference to them. That's still like one person. But we think it's more valuable to the listeners when there's a bigger breadth of music. And these are the impacts which Zainab uniquely provides. So now we're going to talk about those impacts and why they way above impact to creators and to artists that we've heard elsewhere in this debate. So what were those impacts? Firstly, it's more interesting to hear and it challenges your conception of music. But I think you can also speak to unique experiences that you have. So for example, I talked earlier about like the two-tone and the ska movement in Britain. But that spoke uniquely to people who were of like multi-ethnic backgrounds living in England at the time, and that's like the unique benefit that you get is having something which represents you rather than the generic thing which just represents the lowest common denominator. And importantly, it allows these and it allows the subcultures to form. And in order for the subculture to form, you need to have several different acts of the same genre happening, so you're able to make an identity of it. You're able to like buy the posters and feel like you have this sort of identity rather than it just being a sort of music. But I think that these people are far more important than the people who are actually making music, because firstly, there are just like way more of them, and it's like they outnumber them. Like it's like orders of magnitude of hundreds of thousands more people who are listening to music than who are creating music. And I know the impact to the individual artist might sound significant, but I think the humans are generally bad at like thinking about like large numbers. But just imagine like how much that is. But I also say the people who are like who want to make a living of making music are doing all right anyway. They're relatively privileged people because they've like not being able to like have a real job and they're taking a risk. That means that they're probably going to be okay. They're going to be able to do something properly, and they can pursue their hobby in their spare time. But I think that the idea that like like you can just go and listen to like go and engage with other media, so therefore this doesn't matter. It's just like really flippant, because there are particular experiences that music is able to talk to, and then music is able to like to like engage people in a particular way that obviously just watching films cannot. And in general, I would point out there are people all across the world who are able to listen to music over the radio or through streaming services or whatever, who just don't live anywhere near anywhere where the music industry is. These people had no opportunity to gain the benefits of being an artist, and therefore I think you should deprioritize benefits to privileged artists and prioritize the benefits that we talk about, which opening government never did explain what the benefits to people who are actually listening to music are. I think yeah. And so I think that what we show is that that these artists themselves, indie artists, are more willing to sign on to win unique labels, and therefore you're able to get the benefits of consumers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that speech. And now to wrap up the whole debate today, we'll welcome Miloš and Whip. Here.
The way Justin Bieber got discovered was an intern trawled YouTube for like hundreds upon hundreds of hours. Companies that are able to hire this many people in order to be able to discover these type of people are the only companies that are actually able to access a small artist that side government claims to care about, and they are the only people that are able to actually create the superstars that we all really care about and that we all buy into. Notably, people really like Taylor Swift's music, but they also like the community around Taylor Swift. They also really buy into having to dress up for her concerts or like making friendship bracelets. It is only when you get this like cultural contagion that can happen when you have massive marketing budgets that creates a brand around these artists where people buy in, where you get like the Beatles fever, where you get obsession with One Direction, and that is when you actually build a community that is big around music. So we can already, like just based on this point alone, outweigh all of side government, because they talk a lot about like niche music and like how these niche music communities should be catered to. But if we just tell you that we actually create the massive like musical communities that are really, really important to massive populations in the world, then we can actually just get all their impacts, but for a much bigger group of people. This applies to things like K-pop, it applies to Taylor Swift, it applies to One Direction, it applies to like even Bollywood, it applies to the vast majority of the population. You can only ever get that with our point. Okay, so how then do I deal with the teams in this room? I will go through CG, then OG, then I'll do some bench win. Okay, so I still am just not sure at the end of WIP why these big conglomerates cannot hire these people. These people seem like, yeah, I buy all their analysis. They seem like they really, really care about the music industry. They seem like they're really embedded and really knowledgeable. I just don't know why there's not a concerted effort by these conglomerates to hire these to hire these like people who are embedded within these industries in order to be able to tap into these niche markets. Notably, like they tell us that it seems like these people are like they won't want to be hired by these conglomerates because it seems like they will be a sellout. Look, I just think if they care about music to the extent that they tell us they care about music, it is just significantly more proximate to them that they want to be able to have people experience the music that they care about, and they see these conglomerates as a really good vehicle to like get their music out there in order for people to enjoy it. So I think they probably will want to be hired by the conglomerates, and the conglomerates will probably make it incredibly attractive for them to do so. And secondly, like they tell us that they don't need to make as much of a profit. Insofar as they don't contest our analysis about why the margins are incredibly small within these companies, even if like there is a profit incentive of this conglomerate, there's also a really, really strong profit incentive of these small companies because like their functioning is just threatened. Like they need to be able to make enough money to continue to stay open in order to be able to fulfill the role that they say is really important to them. If that is threatened because their margins are so small, they still have a very strong profit incentive. They're still probably likely to be to do all the things that mean you derive as much profit as possible. Okay. So we also think notably, which was missing from our opening bench, something unique about why these companies are uniquely likely to tap into niche markets is because people don't like hearing the same thing over and over again. We all heard I don't know, Happy by Pharrell Williams. The first time it was a good song. When it was played ad nauseum for 2 whole years, we all started hating it. So our brains are tickled and like hearing things that are new. This creates a unique incentive for music companies to tap into industries and genres that they have never tapped into so that we can hear new things, so that people buy in significantly more. So I think they always tap into the niche markets that they tell you about. That was also missing from our opening half. It makes it significantly more plausible that they tap into the niche markets that they tell you they do. Okay, so I think yes, because people love listening to diverse music and because they create the subcultures, that is the exact reason why the conglomerates want to tap into these music markets. Okay, now onto OG. So I think they give us sort of 2 main pushes about why the artists get bad contracts, and then why, secondly, this means that they can crowd other people out of the industry. Firstly, I think we can just weigh over their first point, insofar as it is significantly worse for smaller artists to never get discovered than to get discovered but to potentially have unfavorable contracts. If you as an artist are never able to fulfill your passion because you're never able to have access to any sort of resources, because we've told you that these small literally the only method that a closing government gives us of how these small companies ever discover artists is that they go to the local concert hall. I think at the point at which you are significantly more likely to get discovered on our side, you are better able to help these small artists. So it is always worse for them to never get discovered than to have slightly unfavorable contracts. Okay, yeah, I'll take it before I go you.
We are uniquely logically prior. More money from Spotify, better contracts and artistic freedoms implies better music and more diverse music, but the opposite does not apply.
Okay, I think we are logically prior. You need to be discovered before any of your benefits accrue. If you're never discovered as an artist, you never none of this ever happens. Okay, so cool. Why do small music companies have all the same incentives that the big music companies have to give very bad contracts? They give us sort of 3 reasons. They say these big companies have an incentive to have rights over your music. They have an incentive to make you work long hours, and they have an incentive to make you stay. All of these exist for small companies, and in fact they exist to a higher degree. Insofar as the only way that music production companies will ever make money is if they have rights over your music. These companies have smaller margins, they therefore need to take a bigger chunk of your royalties. Again, they just need to make artists work hard because they need their artists to produce music in order for them to make money. And yes, you get, yes, they have, and also the small companies have an incentive to make you stay. They have more of an incentive to make you stay when they're smaller because a bigger chunk of their revenue has gone into you as an artist and building up your platform. They probably have the same non-compete clauses. Okay, so this means that small companies are actually probably worse. They probably give you worse contracts because their margins are smaller. They have more of an incentive to be exploitative because it is their literal only way to make money. Okay, so then how they tell us that these companies crowd out smaller artists. I literally just don't know how this works. Like the music industry is quite dispersed. There's lots of contractors. It is very difficult for you to capture production because they're all independent contractors. I think this literally only works with streaming companies, and we tell you that music companies have an incentive to keep their music cheap, in order to because piracy is so easy, so they have an incentive to keep music accessible in this way. But at their very best, if you do buy that these bigger companies crowd out smaller companies, if we tell you that these smaller companies are worse and more exploitative, it's actually a good thing that these smaller companies get crowded out. So we think because we can way over both good benches, because we filled in a gap in opening half, and because we are prior to opening half, that we win. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's been the speech. Thank you all very much for the debate. Please cross the floor, shake hands, pack up all your stuff and get out of here as quickly as you can. It is a silent round, so there'll be no results given. But best of luck for the rest of the rounds today.